The doctors gave me 2 months to live, and I flew straight to Atlanta to say goodbye to my daughter. She hadn't spoken to me in 3 years. I just wanted to see her happy, even if it was from a distance, even if it was for only a single moment. Instead, I found her in intensive care on the brink of death. Meanwhile, her husband was tossing back champagne, surrounded by models in a mansion in Buckhead, laughing into his phone when I called him. So, I dialed another number. The man on the other end of the line had been waiting for my call for 17 years. 1 hour later, my daughter's husband was on his knees in front of me in the middle of the hospital hallway, begging for mercy. But it was already too late. The plane shuddered in an air pocket, and the plastic cup of water nearly tipped over on the folding tray. Elias Vane caught the cup with his palm out of reflex and looked back out the window. There was nothing but a thick gray layer of clouds. He was 57 years old, and he had spent the last 15 of them working rotating shifts on the oil rigs of the North Slope in Alaska. In all that time, he had learned not to fear turbulence or the 40 below zero cold or the bosses, who barked over the phone from their comfortable offices in the city. But today, his hands were trembling slightly, and it wasn't because of the bumps in the air. In the inner pocket of his jacket, he carried a piece of paper folded into 4. He already knew it by heart, though he had only read it once. It was a diagnosis written with the typical indifference of medical handwriting. The prognosis was phrased so vaguely that someone without experience might have even felt a glimmer of hope. But Elias had worked with men who died of that same disease, and he understood perfectly what the phrase palliative treatment recommended meant. 2 months, maybe 3 if he was lucky, and luck had never been his strong suit. The strange thing was that he felt almost no fear when the doctor said those words. He had been sitting in the oncologist's office back in Savannah, staring at a yellowed poster, inviting people to get regular checkups. And he could only think of one thing: Maya, his daughter, who had last called him 3 years ago. And that conversation had ended in such a way that it would have been better if it had never happened at all. He remembered every single word because he had replayed them in his head hundreds of nights in a row, trying to figure out the exact moment he had gone wrong. "Pops, you just don't get it," she had said. "Julian gave me everything I ever dreamed of. A penthouse in the best part of town, a car, trips, and you couldn't even make it to my wedding. You've lived your whole life in your cave up north, thinking about nothing but work. You couldn't even save Mama." That last sentence was the knife she drove between his ribs. The part about her mother, about Alina, who had been consumed by the same disease that was now eating him alive back when Maya was only 10 years old. Back then, he worked 20 hours a day to scrape together money for her treatment for a clinic in Houston for an experimental therapy he had read about online. None of it worked. Alina died in his arms 2 days before he managed to gather the necessary sum. And Maya, his little girl, to whom he could never properly explain why Daddy was always working and why Mommy wouldn't open her eyes again, grew up with that thorn buried in her heart. The flight attendant passed through the aisle with the cart, offering drinks and snacks. Elias shook his head and looked back out the window. He wasn't hungry. In reality, he didn't want anything except one thing: to see his daughter, not to talk to her because she wouldn't want him to listen anyway, not to ask for a place in her beautiful new life, because there was no room for him there, just to see her, to make sure she was happy, to tuck her smile away in his memory and take that image with him to where there is no return. He had flown without warning because he had no one to call. Her number had been silent for 6 months. It wasn't that the number was disconnected. It was just silence, as if the phone were turned off forever or had been tossed into a river. At first, Elias thought she had simply changed her number and didn't want to give him the new one. Then he started to worry, but he quickly caught himself. She was an adult. She had a rich husband from a good family. She had everything. She simply didn't want to talk to her father. It was her right. He blamed himself. The clouds outside began to thin, and the earth appeared below. Brown squares of fields, gray ribbons of highways, tiny toy houses of the suburbs. Atlanta was close. Elias pulled out the phone. He had turned off during the flight, and pressed the power button out of habit. The screen lit up. Notifications from the carrier appeared, and suddenly the phone vibrated with an incoming call, an unknown number from the city. He brought the device to his ear, expecting some spam about credit cards or surveys. But the voice on the other end was a woman's, soft and tense, as if she were looking over her shoulder as she spoke. "Elias Vane." "Yes, this is he. My name is Vera. I'm a nurse at Atlanta General. You're the father of Maya Sterling." His heart did something strange, as if it tripped on flat ground and forgot how to keep beating. Elias gripped the phone so hard, the plastic creaked. "Yes, she's my daughter. What happened to her? You need to come as soon as possible. Just you, her husband. He shouldn't find out. What do you mean he shouldn't find out? What happened? Is she alive? The pause on the other end felt like an eternity for now. But it's really better if you come. She dictated the address and the floor number, and then the line went dead. As if someone had abruptly yanked the cord from the wall, Elias sat motionless, staring at the black screen, feeling something shift inside him. The fear he had felt a second ago didn't disappear, but another feeling, Monet, cold and clear like the winter sky over the Georgia coast. He had flown to the city to die, to say goodbye to his daughter, and leave in silence. But now the plans had changed. The plane touched the runway with a barely perceptible thud, and the passengers around him began to move, reaching for the overhead bins. Elias didn't get up from his seat until the aisle was almost empty. He was thinking, trying to process what he had heard. A nurse. Not a doctor, not an official hospital representative, but a nurse calling in secret and asking him to come without the husband knowing. That could only mean one thing. Something very bad. Something the husband wanted to hide. He took a cab at the terminal exit, gave the address, and leaned back in the seat. The city through the window was strange and unrecognizable. Even though he had been born here, everything had changed. New high-rises, new interchanges, new billboards with faces of people he didn't know. The city lived its own life and had long since forgotten Elias Vane from Savannah, who once walked these streets with his little girl on his shoulders. The phone vibrated again. This time it was a text from the bank about the cab fare. Elias looked at the balance out of habit and smiled bitterly. He had little money left, but he wouldn't need it anymore. He had planned to spend his last savings on renting a hotel room, seeing his daughter from afar, and buying a return ticket he probably wouldn't use. But now everything was different. Now he had a purpose. He pulled the oncologist's certificate from his pocket, unfolded it, reread the cold medical terms one more time, and then tore the paper into small pieces, slowly and carefully. 2 months, maybe 3, that was enough. It would be enough for everything that needed to be done. Memories arrived without permission, as they often do when you're traveling in silence, watching a foreign world pass by. Maya at 5 years old, cheeks smeared with jam, laughing so hard the neighbors would knock on the wall. Maya at 10, serious and quiet, dressed in black at Mama's funeral, holding his hand without crying because Daddy told her they had to be strong. Maya at 18, with her honors diploma and bright eyes, saying she would definitely become a famous designer and make the family name proud. Then Maya at 25, dressed in white, in a photo she sent by mail with a short note. I got married. His name is Julian. Why didn't you come? He didn't come because he couldn't, because that day he was in the hospital with a heart attack and he didn't even know she had set the wedding date. She hadn't told him in advance. She simply sent the invitation 3 days before, when it was already too late to buy tickets and get time off from work. She did it on purpose. She wanted him not to come so she could hold it against him later. Or maybe he had invented that excuse for himself, so the thought that his daughter didn't want him there on the most important day of her life wouldn't hurt so much. The cab turned onto the street leading to the hospital, and Elias felt his mouth go dry. The massive hospital building emerged from behind the corner. He asked the driver to stop at the main entrance, paid, stepped out, and stood in the biting wind for a minute, gathering his courage before going inside. The lobby was crowded and noisy, like a bus station. People with tense spaces stood in line at reception, sat on hard benches, talked on phones, or cried in corners. Elias passed them by, following the signs to the indicated wing. 3rd floor intensive care unit, heavy doors with a keypad lock. He stopped, not knowing what to do, and then the door opened from the inside. A woman in her 40s in blue scrubs with a tired face and a piercing gaze looked at him, and he knew it was Vera. Elias Vane. Yes, come with me. We need to talk before you see her. She led him aside to a small corner by the window, where there were 2 plastic chairs and a dusty potted plant. She looked around to make sure no one was listening, and began to speak quickly and quietly. Officially, she was in a car accident. That's her husband's version, and that's what's recorded in the paperwork. Unofficially, it's very different. I've been working here for 12 years, and I've seen enough to tell an accident from a beating. She was admitted 4 days ago with multiple traumas, internal bleeding, and a concussion. Her husband came once, stayed for 5 minutes, and left. Since then, he hasn't even called to ask about her condition. Elias listened, and something dark rose inside him. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not since 1998, when his crew was swindled out of their pay. And he, with 3 other cheated men, went to settle accounts with the people responsible. That was the first time he understood he was capable of things he had never thought of before. Why did you call me specifically? Vera looked him in the eyes. because she was calling for you. When they brought her in, she was unconscious, but she kept repeating one word. Daddy. Not Julian. Not Mama. Not a friend. Daddy. His throat tightened so much it was hard to breathe. 3 years of silence. 3 years of resentment and distance. And when things got truly bad, she called for him. For him, not for the husband who had promised her everything and given her only pain. I want to see her first, hear it all. This isn't the first time she's been in here. In the last 8 months, she's been hospitalized 3 times. The first time with a fractured arm, the second with cracked ribs. Each time the husband came, brought some papers, talked to the director, and she was discharged early. I tried to talk to her, but she only cried and begged me not to tell anyone. She was afraid, very afraid. Afraid of what? Of him, and not just him, his whole family. His father, Silas Sterling, owns a chain of malls. He has connections everywhere. An uncle in the district attorney's office. They can make any report and disappear before an investigator even sees it. She understood that, and that's why she stayed quiet. Elias stood up. His legs didn't want to obey him, but he forced himself to take a step, then another. Take me to her. Vera nodded and walked ahead, swiping her badge to open the doors. They walked down a long hallway, saturated with the smell of antiseptic and misfortune, passing rooms with closed doors and monitors beeping their monotonous count of other people's lives. Then Vera stopped in front of one of the doors and turned back. Prepare yourself. It looks bad. She pushed the door open, and Elias stepped inside. On the bed, wrapped in tubes and wires, lay his daughter, his Maya, whom he used to toss toward the ceiling, catching her with his big hands, while she shrieked with joy. Now nothing was left of that little girl. Her face was pale, almost gray, eyes closed with bruises around them that no makeup could hide. Her lips were split, and her neck was held by a brace under which purple marks were visible. He had seen those marks before. He knew what they were from. Fingers. Human fingers squeezing a throat until the victim stops moving. Elias collapsed into the chair by the bed and took her thin, cold, weak hand. The same hand he had held 30 years ago in the delivery room when the nurse brought him a small bundle and told him it was a girl. He had cried with happiness then. He was crying now, too, but for something completely different. For a long time, he just sat there and looked at her, listening to the rhythmic beep of the machines and the sound of his own blood in his ears. He thought about how everything could have been different if he had gone to the wedding, if he had insisted on meeting Julian first, if he hadn't let her drift so far away. But the past cannot be changed. You can only try to fix the future. And for that he had 2 months, maybe 3. He stood up, walked out of the room, and found Vera waiting in the hallway. Where are her things? In the floor storage locker. The husband didn't pick them up. I need her phone. Vera hesitated, but then she nodded and walked away. A few minutes later, she returned with a clear plastic bag containing clothes, a purse, and a phone with a cracked screen. Elias took the phone and pressed the button. The screen was shattered, but it lit up. It had 20% battery left and no power. He opened the gallery and started looking at the photos. Maya happy at some resort. Maya with a glass of wine at a restaurant. Maya and Julian on a yacht. Everything beautiful. Everything perfect. Everything fake. And then the videos appeared. One of them was dated last month. He pressed play. On the screen appeared the face of a young, attractive man with arrogant eyes and the smile of someone used to getting everything he wants. Off camera, a woman's crying could be heard, along with another person's drunken laughter. Maya, come on, say something for Daddy. Tell him you fell down on your own. The camera panned, and Elias saw his daughter with a split lip, her makeup running, with the eyes of a cornered animal. She was looking at someone off camera, someone she feared deeply, and she spoke with a dead voice. I fell down on my own. The laughter off camera got louder. Several female voices at once. See, Daddy-in-law, your little girl is fine with me. Try and come fix things. You're just a rig worker from the sticks, right? What are you going to do? File a report. More laughter. Then the video cut off. Elias stood in the hospital hallway, staring at the black screen of the broken phone. His hands were not shaking. He was already beyond fear, anger, and despair. He was in that place where only cold clarity remains and the understanding of what must be done. He pulled out his own phone, found a number in his contacts he hadn't dialed in 17 years, and pressed call. The rings went on, one after another, and he was starting to think the number was dead, when a hoarse, deep voice with a slight southern accent answered. Hello, Marcus. It's Elias from the Savannah docks. Do you remember 2007? A long pause, then a sigh that sounded like a laugh. 17 years, Elias. 17 years. I've been waiting for this call. You know, I always said one call. Any debt. You pulled me out of that fire alive. Speak, brother. Who are we tearing down? Elias looked at the closed door of the intensive care unit where his daughter lay. He looked at the phone with a video that was now burned into his memory forever, and spoke only one name. Vera found him in the hospital cafeteria on the first floor 2 hours after that call. Elias was sitting at a plastic table by the window. In front of him was a cup of instant coffee that had gone cold long ago, covered with a thin film. He wasn't looking at the coffee. He wasn't looking out the window. He wasn't looking anywhere in particular. He was simply sitting and waiting like a man who has already made a decision and is now watching the universe rearrange itself around it. The nurse sat down across from him, placed her hands on the table, and for a while she remained silent, studying his face. Then she asked in a low voice, almost a whisper, "What did you do, Elias?" "Nothing special. I called a person I once helped." "You called, and what's going to happen now?" He finally looked up at her. Vera saw something in his eyes that unsettled her. Not anger, not fury, not thirst. Something much more terrifying. Calm. The absolute icy calm of a man who knows exactly what he is doing. Now, there will be justice. Not revenge. Not violence. Not some 98-style shootout. Justice. The truth will come out, and people will answer for what they've been doing for years. I don't understand. You don't need to. It's better if you forget you called me, and that we spoke. If anyone asks, you're just a nurse doing your job. Understood? Vera nodded slowly, though it was clear she wanted to ask 1,000 more questions. But she had worked in that hospital long enough to understand that there are situations where it's better not to know too much. There are people around whom things happen that no one talks about out loud later. How is she? Elias asked. No change. The doctors say the next 48 hours will be decisive. If her body can overcome the inflammation and her kidneys don't fail, there's hope. What percentage of hope? Roughly 50%, maybe a bit less. 50%, 50/50ths. Elias thought about the irony hidden in those numbers. The doctors had given him almost a 100% guarantee of death in a few months, while his daughter balanced on the edge with the odds of a coin toss. And he could do nothing to change those odds. Not with money, not with connections, not even with that call he had just made. Medicine works by its own laws, and no incriminating file on rich families will make cancer cells stop or failing an organ start working again. Can I be with her? Just sit by her side. Officially, visitors aren't allowed in intensive care. But I can take you back in if you act discreetly and don't draw attention, just for a while. They went back up to the 3rd floor. They passed through the same heavy doors. In the room, nothing had changed. The same machines, the same rhythmic beeping, the same pale figure on the bed that was once his little girl. Elias sat in the same chair, took her hand again, and this time he spoke out loud, even though he knew she couldn't hear him. "Maya, it's Daddy. I came late. I know, too late, as always. You were right when you said I'm always late. I was late to the wedding. I've been late to your whole adult life, but I'm here now. And I promise you one thing, he will never touch you again. Not him, not his father, not his whole family. They think they can buy everything in the world, that money solves every problem. But there are things you can't buy. There are people who don't give a damn about their money, and there is a truth that eventually comes to light." He fell silent, still holding her hand. Outside, it was getting dark. Atlanta was turning on its lights, indifferent to the small human tragedies unfolding behind each of its millions of windows. Somewhere in this city, Julian Sterling was celebrating at another party, drinking champagne, hugging models, and not suspecting that his life had already begun to crumble. The first stones had already broken loose from the mountain and were rolling downhill, bringing an avalanche with them. Elias's phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. An unknown number, then another call, and another. He didn't answer. He just watched the screen light up over and over, allowing himself a small, grim smile. It had begun. Vera poked her head into the room and signaled that it was time to leave. Elias leaned over his daughter and carefully kissed her forehead, being careful not to touch the wires and tubes. "Hold on, Maya. Daddy's here. Daddy's going to fix everything." In the hallway, he took out his phone and looked at the missed calls. 7 in the last 10 minutes, all from different Atlanta area codes. He picked one at random and called back. They answered almost immediately, and the voice on the other end was clearly agitated. "This is Elias Vane, father of Maya Sterling." "Yes, I'm the one calling. My name is Andre. I'm an investigative journalist. We received materials about the Sterling family. Very serious materials. They indicate you are the contact person. We want to ask you some questions." "Ask. Is it true that Julian Sterling systematically beat your daughter? That she was repeatedly hospitalized? that his family covered up the incidents every time. It is true. Every last word of it. Are you willing to give an official interview? No. But I'll give you something better. On my daughter's phone, there is a video where her husband forces her to say to the camera that she fell down on her own. If you want, I can send it to you. A pause on the other end of the line. That would be very important for the story, for the investigation. Then write down the email address. In 5 minutes, the video was sent to the indicated address, then to another, and a third. Elias returned calls to all the numbers that had contacted him, and it turned out they were journalists, bloggers, and editors of investigative media. They had all received the same packet of documents about the Sterling family's financial maneuvers. They all wanted confirmation of details, comments, and Elias gave them all the same thing. The video from his daughter's phone, and his dry factual testimony. He didn't dramatize. He didn't sob into the phone. He didn't curse his son-in-law with the worst words. He simply laid out the facts, like a man who, for 15 years, had been a crew chief on the Northern Rigs, and was used to clear language. Date of the first hospitalization. Nature of the injuries. Words of the nurses. Reaction of the husband. It all fit into a complete picture that was chilling. When the calls finally stopped, Elias went down to the lobby and stepped outside. The cold city air burned his lungs, and he coughed long and heavily. The cancer was making itself known, not letting him forget that time was limited. But now that was almost a good thing. Each coughing fit was a reminder that he had nothing to lose, and a man with nothing to lose is capable of things inaccessible to those who cling to life, career, and reputation. The phone rang again. This time it was Marcus, that man from Savannah. Elias, how's it going? You didn't change your mind, did you? No. Why is there a reason? There are calls. A lot of calls. Old man Silas Sterling is already contacting everyone he knows, trying to figure out where the leak came from. His son apparently still doesn't know. He's still partying somewhere, not even answering his phone. That's good. Listen, I want you to understand one thing. What I set in motion can't be stopped now. It's like a snowball that starts rolling, gathering more and more snow, and in the end, it becomes an avalanche. The starings are going to be shaken hard and deep. IRS, FBI, investigation. Things are going to come out that no one is going to like. I'm ready. Are you ready for the fact that this might also affect your daughter? After all, she was part of that family, too. Elias was silent, reflecting on the question. He hadn't thought of that before, but now he understood that Marcus was right. Maya was Julian's wife. Formally, she could also be affected if joint accounts, properties, or financial operations came to light. She is a victim, Marcus, not an accomplice. Any decent investigator will see that. Fine, if that's the case, but if I were you, I'd look for a good lawyer just in case. Lawyers cost money. I don't have any. You will. I'm going to transfer something to you. Don't argue. You saved my life. I have the right to spend part of mine in gratitude. The call ended. Elias put his phone away and looked at the hospital building, massive and indifferent, under the light of the street lamps. Somewhere up there on the 3rd floor, his daughter was fighting for her life, while at some other end of the city, her husband was still enjoying his impunity. Not knowing that the world around him was already on fire, he went back inside and found a quiet corner in the lobby where he could sit and wait. There was nothing to wait for except news from the doctors. But he couldn't leave the hospital. Physically, he could of course, but his soul wouldn't let him. Too many years he had been far away when he should have been close. Now he would be here. Even if it meant sitting on a hard plastic chair all night and listening to a homeless man snoring in a corner of the lobby. The clock read 9:30 in the evening when Vera found him again. She had a strange expression on her face, both scared and excited. Have you seen the news? No. What happened? She handed him her phone. On the screen was the news feed, and the first article made him read intently. Real estate mogul Silas Sterling, owner of Sterling Mall Group, detained for questioning in relation to an investigation into major financial maneuvers. According to sources, it involves millions of dollars in illegal kickbacks in the construction of public infrastructure projects. Elias handed the phone back to the nurse. They work fast. You did this. I only made a call. The rest was done by people who for many years collected information and waited for the right moment. But why? You could have just gone to the police, filed a report about the beatings, and what would have happened? The report would have landed on the desk of some investigator who's friends with Julian's uncle at the DA's office. They would have filed it, lost it, forgotten it, and in a week, Julian would have taken my daughter out of the hospital and finished killing her. No, Vera. Reports work against common people, people like you and me, but not against those with money and connections. For them, Another method is needed. What method? Publicity. When every newspaper is writing about you, when your face is on every news site, when journalists dig into your past and find things even you had forgotten, then no connection helps, because all your friends in power instantly become experts. They don't want their names appearing next to yours. They turn their backs on you, pretend they never knew you. And then you're left alone against the system that used to work for you. Vera looked at him as if she were seeing him for the first time. This quiet, exhausted man, with weathered hands and sunken cheeks, turned out to be someone very different from what he appeared at first glance. Behind his calm facade was a person who knew how to think several steps ahead and wasn't afraid to play big. You are a dangerous man. Elias, I'm just a father who had his daughter taken from him, and a man who has 2 or 3 months left to live. What makes me dangerous isn't my character, but the circumstances. What did you say? 2 or 3 months. He realized he had spoken too much, but he didn't try to deny it. What was the point of hiding what would soon be obvious? Cancer, stage 4. I flew to the city to say goodbye to Maya, not to get revenge on her husband. That's just how things turned out. Vera remained silent for a long time. Then she sat down next to him in the adjacent chair and said in a low voice, "My father died of cancer when I was 20. He also worked in the trades. He also didn't have time to do many of the things he wanted. I understand better than you think." They sat together in the silence of the lobby, two strangers brought together by someone else's misfortune. Outside the hospital windows, the city night flowed on, indifferent and infinite. Somewhere far from there, the empire of the Sterling family was collapsing. The houses of cards of reputations were falling. Phones were ringing that no one wanted to answer. And here, in an intensive care room, a young woman named Maya continued her silent struggle for the right to breathe. Around midnight, Elias's phone rang again. The number was unknown, but something prompted him to answer. Elias Vane. Yes, this is Assistant District Attorney Martinez. Special Crimes Unit. We would like to invite you to give a statement tomorrow at 10 in the morning. I'll dictate the address to you. He noted the address on a napkin, hung up, and allowed himself a smile. The machinery had been set in motion. The official machinery of justice, which normally works slowly and with creaks. But when it finally accelerates, it doesn't stop. The Starings thought they were above the law. They were wrong. No one is above the law when the law is backed by public attention and journalistic investigations. Vera went back to her floor, promising to let him know if Maya's condition changed. Elias was left alone in the semi-empty lobby between plastic chairs and vending machines. He didn't sleep all night. He just sat and thought, replaying the events of the last few hours in his mind. In the morning, he would testify before the DA, tell everything he knew, show the video, give the dates of the hospitalizations. And then he would return here, to wait for his daughter to open her eyes, if she opened them at all. Near dawn, he finally drifted off and had a strange dream. He was back in Savannah in 2007, in that accident that changed his life. The technical building was on fire. Black smoke was pouring out. People were screaming and running everywhere. He ran inside because someone said people were still trapped. He found a man unconscious, pinned under a fallen beam. He carried him out on his back. Even though the man weighed more than he did, he brought him out to the air, laid him on the ground. And then the building behind them finally collapsed. That man lost a leg, but he survived. Elias suffered burns and lung problems that perhaps led to his current diagnosis. And the man he saved became someone very different. Someone who knows how to gather information and wait 17 years for the right moment to pay his debt. Elias woke up because someone was shaking his shoulder. He opened his eyes and saw Vera. Her face was pale, but her eyes were shining with something like hope. She regained consciousness for a moment, literally a minute, but she asked for you. She asked if her daddy was here. Elias jumped up so fast his head spun. He grabbed the back of the chair so as not to fall, and followed the nurse with legs that wouldn't obey him. His heart was beating somewhere in his throat, preventing him from breathing. She had regained consciousness. She was asking for him. She remembered him. At the door to the intensive care unit, he stopped to catch his breath. Then he pushed the door open and entered. Maya lay on the bed with her eyes closed. But something had changed in her face. It wasn't as gray as the day before. And when he sat by her side and took her hand, she weakly squeezed his fingers in response. "Daddy," she whispered, without opening her eyes. "I'm here, Maya. Daddy's here. I'm not going anywhere." A tear rolled down her cheek and disappeared into the pillow. Elias leaned closer, feeling his own eyes sting treacherously. "Forgive me, Daddy, for everything. For those words. For the silence. I was such a fool. There's no need. Rest. Recover your strength. We'll talk later." We have plenty of time, he lied. Of course, he didn't have much time. But she didn't need to know that. Right now, she only needed one thing. To know that her father was near, that she was loved, that she was no longer alone. Maya sank back into sleep. But her fingers didn't let go of his hand, and Elias sat by her side without moving, without letting go of her hand, watching as a new day dawned outside the window, a day in which everything would change definitively. At that same moment, that Elias was sitting by his daughter's bed holding her hand, a very different scene was unfolding 30 miles from the hospital. The mansion in Buckhead was flooded with lights. Music was thumping so loud it could be heard from neighboring properties. And by the heated pool, a group of a dozen people had settled in, clearly not planning to end the party before dawn. Julian Sterling, 32 years old, heir to the Sterling real estate empire, and husband of the woman, who at that moment was fighting for her life in intensive care, lay on a lounge chair with a glass of champagne in his hand, watching his two models in bikinis, played some silly game with a ball. He was drunk, but not too much. Just enough to feel a pleasant relaxation and not think about anything serious. And plenty of serious things had accumulated lately. Maya was back in the hospital. Those bruises again, the doctor's questions again, the need to call his father and ask him to handle it again. But his father always handled it, and everything always ended fine. A few calls, an envelope to the right person, and suddenly domestic accident or consequences of a fender bender appeared in the paperwork. The system worked like clockwork, and Julian had long since stopped worrying about those trifles. One of the models, a long-legged blonde named Courtney, approached his lounge chair and sat next to him, shaking drops of water from her tanned shoulders. "Julian, where's your wife? Sick again?" He smiled smugly and took a sip of champagne. "Always something with her. She's very fragile. Maybe she's lacking vitamins. Maybe a brain too." Courtney laughed, and Julian felt the usual pleasure of his own wit. He liked beautiful women laughing at his jokes. He liked feeling like the center of attention, the master of the situation, the man to whom everything was permitted. The phone on the table next to the bottle of Dom Perignon vibrated for the third time in the last hour. Julian looked at the screen and saw Dad again, his father. He probably wanted to know how the party was going, or remind him of the meeting with investors tomorrow. It didn't matter. He'd call him back in the morning. He rejected the call and went back to watching the models in the pool. Life was beautiful. The phone rang again, and this time Julian finally answered because it was already the sixth call in a row, and it was starting to irritate him. "Dad, what is it? I'm busy." His father's voice in the receiver was strange, not like always. Silas Sterling always spoke with confidence, clearly like a man used to giving orders. But now in his voice there was something unusual, something like fear. "Son, where are you?" "At the house with friends." "Why?" "I was just visited by the anti-corruption unit. They're asking about the infrastructure contracts, about the 2014 projects." Julian sat up slowly on the lounge chair. The drunkenness began to dissipate from his head with alarming speed. "Dad, that's not something to talk about over the phone. They know everything. Julian, everything. They have documents, accounts, correspondence from where? Who leaked? Wait, I don't understand. What documents? What are you talking about? About what has kept our family afloat for the last 10 years? About the kickbacks? About the schemes? About the people we paid off? All of that is now in the hands of investigators," and the call cut off. Julian stared at the phone, trying to understand what had happened. Then he dialed his father again. Long rings. Then the mechanical voice of the voicemail. Again, Courtney noticed his expression had changed, and moved closer. "Hey, what's wrong? Did something happen?" "I don't know. I need to make some calls." He stood up and walked away from the pool, dialing the family lawyer's number. "Busy. His uncle's number at the DA's office. The number you have dialed is out of service or disconnected. The number of his father's business partner, with whom they had built those infrastructure projects together. The phone is off or out of the service area. Something was very wrong. Very wrong." Julian opened the browser on his phone and typed his father's name into the search bar. What he saw made him grab the back of the nearest chair to keep from falling. Real estate mogul Silas Sterling detained on suspicion of million-dollar fraud. Scandals surrounding infrastructure projects. New details. Sterling family under investigation. What is known so far? And more, and more, and more. Dozens of headlines, each more terrible than the last. Julian scrolled through the news, feeling as if the ground was sinking under his feet. From where? How? Who could have done this? One article, caught his attention, especially domestic violence in elite family. The wife of the heir to a commercial empire was repeatedly hospitalized for beatings. He opened it and saw his face in the photo. Next to it was a photo of Maya, clearly taken from her social media, and under the photo's text that made him break into a cold sweat. According to sources in medical circles, Maya Sterling was admitted at least 3 times in the last 8 months to different hospitals in the city with injuries characteristic of victims of domestic violence. Each time her husband, Julian Sterling, insisted on the version of domestic accidents, and thanks to his family's connections, these P's did not receive proper attention. Further down was a video. That same video he had recorded a month ago when he was drunk and furious and wanted to show that fool who was boss in the house. He had forced her to speak to the camera, saying she had fallen on her own. And he had laughed, and the girls around him had laughed too. Now that video was on the internet, and hundreds of thousands of people had already seen it, according to the view counter. Julian threw the phone onto the grass and covered his face with his hands. This was the end, the total and definitive end. Even if his father got out of the illegal kickback story, even if his uncle at the DA managed to fix something in the criminal case, this video could no longer be erased. It had spread across the entire internet. It had been shared by every major channel, and nicking millions of people were discussing it in the comments. Suddenly, he realized that he had never before felt so helpless. All his life, any problem was solved with way of money or connections. You disrespected a cop and got a ticket. Dad called. You hit someone's car and didn't want to pay. The lawyer fixed it. You beat your wife until you almost killed her. The hospital director signed the necessary papers. But now all those mechanisms were useless, because the information had been set free and had taken on a life of its own. It could not be bribed, intimidated, or crushed with authority. It simply existed. And with every minute, there was more of it. Courtney and the other guests began to realize something. Someone was already looking at their phone. Someone was whispering. The festive atmosphere vanished, as if someone had flipped an invisible switch. People began to leave, murmuring apologies and claiming urgent business. Half an hour later, by the pool, only Julian remained, sitting on a lounge chair with an empty glass in his hand, staring into the darkness. The phone rang again. This time, the number was unknown. Julian answered mechanically, without thinking. Julian Sterling. Yes, this is Assistant District Attorney Martinez. Special Crimes Unit. You must report to give a statement tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning. I will dictate the address to you. He noted the address on a napkin he found on the table and hung up. His hands were shaking. His head was empty like a ransacked house. An hour later, he was speeding through the night city in his Porsche Cayenne, ignoring speed limits and rules. He needed to go see Maya. He needed to see her, talk, understand what was happening. She should be in that private clinic where they normally took her after the incidents. But when he arrived, the doctor on duty looked at him with barely disguised disdain and told him that Maya Sterling was not registered there. Then where is she? As I understand it, at General in intensive care. Intensive care. That word hit him like a slap. He knew he had hit her harder than usual. He knew she had fallen badly and hit her head. But intensive cry, that was already too much. That already exceeded what could be silenced and forgotten. He drove to Atlanta General, violating every possible rule and miraculously avoiding an accident. At the hospital entrance, he parked directly on the grass, got out of the car, and rushed inside. In the lobby, he grabbed the arm of the first nurse. He passed and almost shouted in her face, "Where is intensive care? I need to see my wife, Maya Sterling." The nurse stepped back and pointed toward the elevators. Julian ran, not noticing the gazes that followed him from everywhere. He didn't know that his face was already recognized by people who had read the news or seen that video. He didn't understand that to everyone else, he was no longer the heir to a wealthy family, but the man who beat his wife and filmed it on video. On the 3rd floor, security stopped him. 2 burly men in uniform blocked his path and asked for identification. "I'm the husband of a patient. You must let me through." "One moment. We're going to verify." One of the guards called somewhere, spoke in a low voice, then looked at Julian with an expression that was hard to decipher. "You cannot see the patient." "Orders from the treating physician." "What do you mean I can't? I have a right. I'm her husband. The same husband who beat her for 8 months straight." The voice came from somewhere to the side. Julian turned and saw a middle-aged woman in medical scrubs with a tired face and a gaze that boded no good. "And who are you?" "I'm the nurse who received your wife at this hospital 3 times. I saw her fractures, her bruises, her tears, and I called her father because someone had to protect her." The father. That word made Julian freeze. He knew Mia had a father, a rig worker from Savannah, who hadn't appeared in their lives for years. Maya sometimes mentioned him when she was especially depressed, but Julian never took him seriously. What could a simple rig worker do against a Sterling family? Where is this father of hers? In the room with his daughter. Unlike you, he came as soon as he found out. Julian moved toward the unit doors, but the guards blocked his path again. He tried to push them aside, but they were stronger than they looked, and a second later, he was face first against the wall, with his arms twisted behind his back. Calm down, sir, or we'll call the police. Do you know who I am? We know the guy from the video, who beats women and forces them to lie to the camera. Those words made him regain his sobriety better than any cold shower. He stopped struggling and let the guards take him aside. He stood leaning against the wall, breathing heavily, trying to understand what to do next. At that moment, the door to intensive care opened, and out came a short, thin man with sunken cheeks and weathered hands, dressed in a simple jacket and worn jeans. Nothing special, just an ordinary middle-aged working man, but something in his eyes made Julian freeze. The man approached, stopped a few paces away, and looked at Julian with a long, heavy gaze. So, this is what you are, Julian Sterling, the prince on a white horse, the one who promised my daughter a fairy tale and gave her a hell. Listen, I don't know what they've told you, but this is all a misunderstanding. Maya, just shut up. A single word spoken in a low, quiet voice, but with so much force that Julian actually fell silent, as if his mouth had been sealed. I saw the video. I heard you laughing. I saw my daughter's face when she says to the camera what you force her to say. I saw her in that room full of tubes and bruises. So don't give me that misunderstanding talk. How much do you want? This question escaped Julian automatically. All his life any problem was solved with money, and he didn't know how to think any other way. How much? $1 million. 510. I'll sign everything over to Maya. Penthouses, cars, accounts. I'll give her a divorce without any conditions. Just stop all of this. Take down the articles. Erase the video. Elias looked at him in silence, and it was impossible to read any emotion on his face. Julian interpreted this as a signal to continue. I have money, not as much as before, but enough. I can transfer to your account. Say 200,000 right now. It's not a bribe. It's compensation for everything I did, for the pain I caused your daughter. I understand that money cannot fix the past, but it can help build the future. 200,000, 500,000. I'll find that sum, even if I have to sell everything I have. And what must I do for those 500,000? Simply stop all this. Tell the investigators you exaggerated, that Maya fell down on her own, that the video was recorded as a joke, a stupid joke. People will believe it. People always believe what they want to believe. Elias took a step forward, and Julian involuntarily stepped back. There was less than 3 feet between them. Do you know how much I make a year on my shift on the North Slope? A little over 15,000. 500,000 is almost 35 years of my work. A lot of money for someone like me. There you have it. It's good money. I didn't finish 35 years of work. And you think for that money, I'm going to betray my daughter, that I'm going to tell the investigators she fell down on her own. When I saw the video where you hit her, when I saw her in that room full of bruises and tubes. It's not a proposal of betrayal. It's a proposal of compromise. Compromise, pretty word. And do you know what compromise you were proposing to my daughter all these months? Shut up. Take it. Pretend everything is fine, and then I won't kill you completely. That was your compromise. Julian felt the cold sweat running down his back. This conversation was not going at all as he had planned. The man in front of him did not react to money, did not fear threats, did not try to negotiate. He was simply standing there looking at him like a boa looks at a rabbit. What do you want then? Tell me what you want, and I'll do whatever it is. Nothing. What do you mean nothing? Everyone has a price. I don't have a price because I have nothing to buy. I have 2 or 3 months left to live. I have cancer. Stage 4. Money is useless to me because I won't have time to spend it. Power is useless to me because there is no one to exercise it over and no time to do it. The only thing I need is to know that my daughter is safe, and she will be safe only when you are in prison. Those words hit Julian like a sledgehammer to the head. Cancer stage 4. 2 or 3 months. The man who had destroyed his life was himself on the brink of death. There was a monstrous irony in this. A cosmic injustice. Are you serious about the cancer? Absolutely serious. I flew to the city to say goodbye to my daughter. Not to get revenge on you. Not to destroy your family. Just to say goodbye because she hadn't spoken to me in 3 years, and I wanted to see her one last time. And instead, I found her on the brink of death. And then I found out you had beaten her for 8 months straight. Tears were running down Julian's face. But they weren't tears of repentance. It was pure, unadulterated fear. The animal terror of a person who for the first time in his life encountered something that cannot be bought, intimidated, or destroyed. I'll change. I swear, I'll never touch her again. I'll go to therapy, treatment, whatever it takes. It's too late. Julian, too late. Elias turned around and walked back toward the intensive care door. At the entrance, he stopped and turned. You know, I wanted to forgive you. Truly, I did. I came here to simply take my daughter and leave. Take her where you couldn't reach her and give her the chance to start over. But then, I saw that video and I heard how you were laughing. You were laughing, Julian. At her fear, at her pain. That's when I understood that there is nothing here to forgive. He stepped into the unit and the door closed behind him with a soft click. Julian remained sitting on the floor in a puddle of his own tears under the gazes of the guards and the nurse who had called Elias. A few minutes later, the police arrived. They lifted him off the floor, put him in handcuffs, and led him toward the exit. People in the lobby filmed him with their phones. Someone shouted insults. Someone simply looked with silent condemnation. Julian Sterling's world had collapsed definitively and irrevocably, and no amount of money could change that. The police car took Julian to the station to give a statement. But already a few hours later, they let him go on his own rec. Formally, they hadn't yet filed charges. He only had the status of a witness in the case of his father's financial maneuvers and the status of a suspect in the case of systematic domestic violence. The duty prosecutor, however, immediately filed a restraining order for Maya, which the judge granted without hesitation. He was notified in writing that he could not approach the hospital or contact her while the investigation lasted. The lawyer, whom he managed to get late at night, advised him to stay quiet, not give statements to the press, and wait for the development of events. But Julian didn't know how to stay quiet, nor did he know how to wait. All his life he had been used to acting, to pushing, to imposing his will through any obstacle. And now, when everything was crumbling around him, he couldn't just fold his arms and watch his existence turn to ash. Morning found him in an apartment in Inman Park that he rented for encounters his wife wasn't supposed to know about. He hadn't slept all night, checking the news and watching the number of posts about his family grow exponentially. By 8 o'clock in the morning, the scandal had already been covered by all the major media outlets, and the video of the beating of Maya had exceeded 3 million views. The comments under it, Julian couldn't read them because after the first 10, he started shaking. The phone was exploding with calls, but they weren't friends or partners. Journalists, bloggers, unknown people who wanted to get comments, or simply vent their hatred. Julian silenced the phone and threw it on the sofa. But that didn't make him feel better. He tried to contact his father, but Silas Sterling was still unavailable. According to the news, they had detained him for questioning and hadn't let him go yet. His uncle at the DA's office hadn't answered calls for 2 days. Business partners who yesterday called him brother and swore eternal friendship seemed to have evaporated from the face of the earth. For the first time in his life, Julian understood what it meant to be truly alone. Near 10 in the morning, he made a decision. He had to go back to the hospital and talk to his father-in-law Manto Man, without hysteria or threats. Maybe it wasn't too late to negotiate. Maybe that rig worker simply didn't understand who he was messing with and could be convinced to back down. After all, every person has their price. Absolutely everyone. He put on a clean shirt, cleaned himself up more or less, and called an Uber because he had left his Porsche by the hospital, and picking it up now was too risky. The driver recognized him on the way, and throughout the trip kept casting glances at him through the rear-view mirror, but said nothing. Julian pretended not to notice. At the hospital entrance, journalists with cameras were huddling. Someone had leaked the information that the victim was right there, and now they were lurking, waiting to get exclusive shots. Julian went around the building to the other side, and entered through the service entrance he remembered from previous visits. The lobby was full of people, as usual. No one paid him attention, because here, everyone had their own problems and their own pain. Julian went up to the 3rd floor, and stopped in front of the intensive care unit doors. There were no guards. Probably they had changed shifts after the night. He pushed the door and entered a long hallway, with rooms on both sides. The smell of medicine and disinfectant. The soft beep of monitors behind closed doors. Julian walked slowly, peering into each room through the glass windows, until he found the one he was looking for. Maya lay on the bed, still connected to the machines. But something had changed. She was conscious. Her eyes were open, and she was looking somewhere at the ceiling, while a nurse checked the monitor readings. By the bed sat that man, her father. He was holding her hand and saying something to her in a low voice. Julian pushed the door and entered the room. The reaction was instantaneous. Maya saw him and shuddered with her whole body. Her eyes widened with terror, and the monitors began to beep faster, registering the increase in heart rate. The nurse turned and opened her mouth to shout. Elias rose from the chair and took a step forward, interposing his body between Julian and his daughter. "Stay where you are." The voice was low, but there was something in it that made Julian stop mid. He raised his hands in a conciliatory gesture. "I just want to talk quietly, without any scandal. Just talk. Maya, do you want him here?" She shook her head, and that weak, almost imperceptible movement hit Julian harder than any punch. 3 years ago, this woman looked at him with adoration. 2 years ago, she was still trying to justify him. A year ago, she began to fear him. And now, in her eyes, there was only fear and revulsion. "Call security," Elias told the nurse, and she ran out of the room. "Wait, please, give me 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes." Elias did not move from his place, still standing between Julian and his daughter's bed, a living shield of bone and muscle that didn't plan to yield. "Talk, you have time until security arrives." Julian swallowed. The words he had rehearsed on the way suddenly seemed stupid and inappropriate. But there was no turning back. "I know everything looks very bad. I know you have every right to hate me, but I asked you to think about the consequences. If this case goes to trial, everyone will suffer. Not just me, not just my father. Maya will too. Her name will be dragged through the mud by the press. Her photos will be on every website. Her story will be discussed by millions of strangers. Is that what you want for your daughter? Her story is already being discussed thanks to you and your video. That can be stopped. I'll find a way to delete the video from everywhere. I'll hire specialists to clean the internet. I'll give Maya a divorce under any condition. I'll transfer all the properties I have left to her. She'll be able to start a new life from scratch. But for that, you have to withdraw your statements and ask the journalists to stop the publications." Elias listened in silence, and it was impossible to read any emotion on his face. Julian interpreted this as a signal to continue. "I have money. Not as much as before, but enough I can transfer to your account. Say $500,000 right now. It's not a bribe. It's compensation for everything I did, for the pain I caused your daughter. I understand that money cannot fix the past, but it can help build the future. $500,000. $1 million. I'll find that sum even if I have to sell everything I have. And what must I do for that $1 million? Simply stop all this. Tell the investigators you exaggerated, that Maya fell down on her own, that the video was recorded as a joke, a stupid game, and people will believe it. People always believe what they want to believe." Elias took a step forward at Boone, and Julian involuntarily stepped back. There was less than 3 feet between them. "Do you know how much I make a year on my shift on the North Slope? A little over 15,000. $1 million is more than 60 years of my work. A lot of money for someone like me. There, you see, it's very good money. I didn't finish 60 years of work, and you think for that money I'm going to betray my daughter? That I'm going to tell the investigators she fell down on her own when I saw the video where you hit her, when I saw her in that room full of bruises and tubes?" Julian fell to his knees, literally in the middle of the hospital room, on the cold linoleum under the gaze of the man he had despised and considered insignificant. Please, I beg you. I'll do everything you tell me. I'll go to therapy. I'll never lift a hand against her again. I'll report every step I take to you. Just don't send me to prison, please." Tears were running down his face, and they were real tears, not faked. For the first time in his life, he was crying out of fear for the future, which appeared to him as a black hole. Prison, shame, the loss of everything he had, and no hope of returning to his previous life. Elias looked down at him, and in his eyes was something strange. Not the triumph of the victor, not malice, something like exhaustion and sadness. "Do you know what's the most terrible part of this whole story? That even now you don't understand what you did. You cry not because you caused my daughter pain. You cry because you're afraid of the consequences for yourself. Not once have you apologized to her. Not once have you asked how she feels. You only think of yourself even now while on your knees. It's not like that. I love Maya, in my own way. But I love her in your way." "Exactly. In your way means hitting her when she irritates you, humiliating her when you want to feel powerful, locking her in the house so she doesn't dare complain. That's not love, Julian. That's a sickness. And I sincerely hope that in prison they force you to get treatment." The room door burst open, and security guards entered, followed by 2 police officers. They lifted Julian off the floor, put his hands behind his back, and handcuffed him. "Julian Sterling, You are under arrest for suspicion of violating the terms of the restraining order and attempting to intimidate a witness. You have the right to remain silent. Everything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. They led him toward the exit. At the door, he turned. Maya was looking at him from the bed, and in her eyes was no fear or hatred, just emptiness. The emptiness of a person who no longer feels anything toward her tormentor. Maya, forgive me. Please forgive me. She turned toward the wall and closed her eyes, and that silence was more terrible than any word. They took Julian away. Elias stood for a moment, staring at the closed door. Then he went back to the chair by his daughter's bed. Daddy, yes. Maya, will he really go to prison? Truly, not for long, probably. Rich people know how to get away, but his life will never be the same. His name became synonymous with all this. They'll recognize him on the street and point. They won't hire him for any decent job. They won't accept him into any respectable circle. That's worse than prison, believe me. And his father will answer for his own crimes. So much came out that it's enough for many years of prison, illegal kickbacks, tax evasion, bribing officials. His whole empire was built on dirty money, and now the whole world knows it. Maya remained silent, processing what she had heard. Then she turned her head and looked at her father. Daddy, are you really sick? What you said about the cancer? He didn't lie. There was no point. It's true. I was diagnosed 2 weeks ago. Stage 4 metastasis. The doctors say 2 or 3 months. Tears rolled down her cheeks and she tried to sit up in bed, but couldn't. Why didn't you tell me before? Why didn't you call? And would you have answered 3 years without answering my calls? For 3 years, I was a stranger to you. I didn't want to impose. I'm sorry. Forgive me. Daddy, I was a fool. I thought Julian was happiness, that wealth was happiness. And it turned out that happiness is when you are loved just like that, without conditions. Like you loved me. He leaned over and hugged her carefully, trying not to touch the wires and tubes. I always loved you, Maya. Even when you didn't want to know about me. Even when you said those terrible words about your mother. I loved you, and I will love you until my last breath. They stayed like that for a long time. Father and daughter finally found, after so many years of separation. Outside the room window, the sun shone, indifferent to human tragedies and triumphs. Somewhere in the city, Julian was being taken to the detention center. Somewhere they were questioning his father. Somewhere journalists were writing new articles about the scandal of the century. But here in the small intensive care room, there was silence and calm for the first time in a very many years. Daddy, yes. Take me home, please. When the doctors allow it, take me back down south. I want to see the savannah marshes again. I want to see the fireflies. He smiled, and it was the first genuine smile in many days. I'll take you, I promise. The month passed like a single long day full of events. Maya was moved from intensive care a week after Julian was taken to the detention center. Then came a regular room, long hours of recovery, endless doctor visits and procedures that exhausted her, as if she were unloading freight cars. But by her side was always her father. He arrived every morning and left only at dusk, when the nurses practically kicked him off the floor. Elias rented a small room in a hostel near the hospital, because he didn't have money for a decent hotel. Marcus, that man from Savannah, transferred a sum that made Elias's eyes widen in amazement. But he only took a small part, just what was necessary for lodging and food. The rest he asked to be kept for Maya for the future, when she would get on her feet and start a new life. The news about the Sterling family continued to resonate across the country. Silas Sterling was officially arrested and charged with several crimes, including tax evasion on a massive scale and bribing public officials. His lawyers tried to get house arrest, citing age and the defendant's health, but the court rejected it. There was too much evidence. The scandal had been too loud. Public opinion followed the process with too much attention. Julian was charged with systematic beatings and serious injury. That video he had recorded while laughing and mocking his wife became the main piece of evidence for the prosecution. They showed it in court. They showed it on the news. They discussed it on every talk show. The face of Julian Sterling had become a symbol of domestic violence, a graphic illustration of what happens behind the closed doors of wealthy homes. Maya refused to give interviews or appear personally in court hearings. Her testimony was recorded on video at the hospital in the presence of a lawyer and a psychologist, and that was enough. She spoke in a low voice, sometimes stopping to contain the tears that overwhelmed her, but she told it all. The first hit that happened 3 months after the wedding, the apologies and promises that were never kept, the fear that became her constant companion, the feeling of hopelessness when you understand that no one is going to help, because your torturador has too much money and connections. Elias sat by her side while they recorded her statement and held her hand. He didn't cry, although inside everything was twisting with pain for his daughter. He was simply there, as he should have been all those years. But wasn't because she herself had pushed him away, because he allowed her to. Because life turned out that way, and no other. When they finally discharged Maya from the hospital, they left that same day. Elias bought 2 plane tickets to Savannah, and Maya didn't say a word against it. She simply nodded when he asked if she was ready, gathered her few belongings in a small suitcase, and walked out of the room without looking back. Atlanta, which once seemed to her the city of her dreams, now only provoked the desire to run as far away as possible and never return. In the airport, they recognized her. A woman approached Maya and told her she admired her courage, that she was brave for having escaped that nightmare. Maya thanked her and quickly passed toward the boarding gate, hiding her face behind dark glasses. Elias walked by her side, ready at any moment to protect her from foreign gazes and questions. The plane took off toward the gray city sky, and Maya finally allowed herself to relax. She looked out the window at the city receding below and thought about how strange life is. Just a month ago, she lay in intensive care, not knowing if she would survive. Just a month ago, her father was to her a stranger, whom she despised and blamed for all her misfortunes. And now she was flying with him south, to a place she once called the middle of nowhere. And that place seemed to her the only safe corner in the whole world. Daddy. Yes, Maya. Tell me about home. How is it? Elias smiled and began to tell her about the endless marshes that turn golden in the setting sun, about the river that meanders through the Spanish moss like a silver ribbon, about the small town where everyone knows everyone and no one locks their doors, about the silence so deep and full that at first it seems deafening and then becomes the most beautiful sound in the world. Maya listened, and for the first time in many years she felt something like peace. Happiness was still far away, but peace. The feeling that the worst was behind and ahead, something new waited. Perhaps unknown but no longer terrifying, that she did feel. They landed in Savannah in the late afternoon, when the sun had already set and the sky was dyed a deep orange. From the airport to the small town where Elias lived was another 2-hour drive, and he had arranged with an old friend to pick him up. The friend was named Otis. He had worked with Elias on the docks and lived in the house next door. A large bearded man with kind eyes. He hugged Elias like a brother and shook Mia's hand carefully, as if afraid to break her. I've heard about you, girl. The whole town followed the news. We were all worried. Mia felt embarrassed and didn't know what to answer. She wasn't used to this simple, uncalculated concern. In the city circles she had moved in for the last few years, people expressed their sympathy with polite phrases behind which there was nothing but curiosity and a desire to gossip. And this stranger looked at her as if she were his own daughter, and his words were absolutely sincere. The drive to the town took even longer than 2 hours, because the road was flooded in some parts, and they had to go slow. Mia fell asleep in the back seat, covered with a warm blanket Otis had prudently brought along. Elias sat up front and looked at the familiar road, the endless green plains, the distant lights of small towns. He was home, and for the first time in many years, he was home and not alone. His house turned out to be a small wooden building with a slanting roof and a porch overlooking the water. Inside it was clean but modest. Kitchen, living room, and 2 bedrooms. Otis had turned on the AC beforehand, and the house was cool and cozy. Maya looked around, getting used to the new place, and suddenly noticed a photograph on the wall. Herself, small, about 5 years old, in her smiling father's arms. Next to them was Mama, young and beautiful, laughing at the camera. You kept it? I kept all the photos. They were always with me, even when you didn't want to know about me. Maya approached the wall and looked at the photo for a long time. She almost didn't remember her mother like that, alive and joyful. In her memory, there was only a pale woman in a hospital bed who got weaker with each day, and Daddy, who was always working, and whom she blamed for not being able to save Mama. Forgive me, Daddy, for everything. For those words about Mama. I was a child. I didn't understand. You were a child who was suffering. Children say terrible things when they suffer. It's normal. I forgave you a long time ago. They hugged in the middle of the small living room, and Maya cried while Elias stroked her head and whispered something soothing, as he did when she was very little and woke up from nightmares. The first days in the South were difficult. Maya got used to the silence, to the absence of the city bustle, to the slow pace of life that here seemed the only one possible. She slept a lot, ate a lot, walked a lot around the area, breathing the clean, humid air. Little by little, the bruises on her body faded, the pain in her ribs subsided, and the nightmares that haunted her every night began to come less and less frequently. Elias was close, but he didn't push. He didn't try to force things. He cooked, told stories about the locals and their eccentricities, showed her his favorite spots by the river. One night, he woke her at midnight and led her to the porch, throwing a thick shawl over her shoulders. Look. Maya looked up at the sky and froze. Heat lightning illuminated the horizon, while thousands of fireflies danced over the water in the darkness. She had seen them in photos and movies, but the reality was 1,000 times more beautiful. It was so lovely it took her breath away. This is what I wanted to show you, before many years ago, but you didn't want Honeycomb. I was a fool. I thought happiness was in big cities and expensive things, and it turns out it's here, in the silence, in the beauty, in having someone by your side who truly loves you. They stayed on the porch watching the fireflies. Father and daughter finally found, and that moment was worth all the lost years, all the tears and resentments, all the lived nightmare. 2 weeks after arriving, Maya found a pregnancy test in the bathroom that she had bought in Atlanta and forgotten in her bag. She spent a long time looking at the box, without daring to open it. She had suspected it for several days, but she was afraid to know the truth. She was afraid of what that truth would mean. The test showed 2 lines. She sat on the edge of the tub and looked at that small plastic object that changed everything. A baby. His baby. The baby of the man who beat her for 8 months and almost killed her. And what to do now with that knowledge? Elias found her an hour later. She was still sitting in the bathroom with the test in her hands and a blank gaze fixed on the wall. Maya, what happened? She handed him the test in silence. He looked at the 2 lines and on his face appeared an expression she couldn't decipher. It's his. Yes. A long pause. Elias sat next to her on the edge of the tub and took her hand. And what do you want to do? I don't know. I don't know, Daddy. I can't think of this baby without remembering him, what he did to me. But at the same time, it's my baby, too. My blood, part of me. You don't have to make a decision right now. You have time to think about it. And what would you do in my place? Elias was silent, gathering his thoughts. I can't answer that question. It's your body and your life. Any decision you make will be the right one because it will be your decision. I will be by your side no matter what happens. For how long? What? How long will you be by my side? The doctor said 2 or 3 months. It's already been almost a month. Elias smiled with that special smile that had appeared in him in the last week. The smile of a man who has accepted his fate and is no longer afraid of it. Doctors say many things, but they don't know everything. They don't know that now I have a reason to live, that I wake up every morning and see you, and that gives me strength for 1 more day. Maybe I'll live 2 months, maybe 6, maybe a year. No one knows for sure. But the time I have left, I'll spend it with you. Maya hugged him and cried, but they were no longer tears of despair. They were tears of relief, tears of a person who finally understood she was not alone. Another week passed. Maya thought a lot, walked a lot through the marshes, talked a lot with her father about the past and the future. And one morning she woke up with the feeling that the decision had arrived on its own from somewhere deep within her soul. She went out to the porch, where Elias was drinking coffee and looking at the endless green plain. Daddy, I've decided. And what did you decide? I'm going to have the baby. It's not his fault having that father. It's my child. And I'm going to love them. And I'll do everything so they are never like Julian. I'll raise them different. Elias put down his cup and looked at his daughter. Tears shone in his eyes, but he was smiling. You're strong, Maya. Stronger than I thought. Stronger than you yourself thought. It's because you're by my side. Because I'm no longer alone. He stood up and hugged her. They stayed on the porch hugging, watching the southern sky beginning to brighten in the east. A new day, a new life, a new hope. Ellis Vane lived another 14 months, much longer than the doctors had predicted. He saw his daughter's belly round with each month. He held her hand when she gave birth in the small regional hospital. He was the first to hold his grandson in his arms, a tiny baby with dark eyes and a stubborn chin. They named him Elias after his grandfather. The elder Elias managed to teach him his first words, managed to rock him on his knees, managed to tell him the stories he once told. Maya. And then one quiet winter night, when a soft drizzle was falling outside, and heat lightning illuminated the horizon, he closed his eyes and didn't open them again. Maya found him in the morning lying peacefully in bed with a smile on his lips. She didn't scream or cry. She simply sat by his side, took his hand, and stayed like that for a long time, saying goodbye to the man who had given her a second life, who had proven that love is stronger than money, stronger than fear, stronger even than death. They buried him in the small cemetery behind the town, from where you could see the endless marshes. On the headstone they wrote simply, Elias Vane, father, grandfather, a man who did the right thing. and Maya stayed to live in that small house, with the porch overlooking the water. She raised her son and worked remotely as a designer, as she had once dreamed in her youth. Sometimes at night, she would go out to the porch and watch the fireflies over the water, and it seemed to her that her father somewhere up there was also watching those magical lights. Julian Sterling received 4 years in prison. His father 8 years in a federal penitentiary. Their empire collapsed. Their name became synonymous with the worst. Their story entered the books as an example that money does not give the right to violence or impunity. And little Elias grew up as a healthy and happy boy, knowing that his grandfather had been a hero, that he had flown to rescue Mummy when she was in trouble, that he had made a single call that changed everything. And when Elias grew up, he too would do the right thing, because that was how he had been raised. Because love is passed down from generation to generation. Because a single person can change the world if they have the courage to try. I'm really glad you're here, and that I could share my story with you. If you liked it, show me by liking the video and subscribing to my channel. Let's see how many of us there are. Write in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is. I'm so curious to know where all you wonderful people are tuning in from. If you want to support me a little extra, you can also send a small donation. I share new life stories for you every single day. And now, 2 of my most popular stories will pop up on the screen, so you can choose what to watch. Subscribe to Astral Vengeance.